It's not uncommon for a working mix to look something like this, where I have tracks hidden, I have tracks muted, I have no real structure to my arrange. The structure is simply the last thing recorded is at the bottom. I have loops that run on long past the end of the song, and so on. I have files here that I haven't consolidated, take folders that I haven't consolidated. So the first thing to do is to clean the project up, and I'm going to begin by deleting all the hidden tracks, simply because I know that these hidden tracks are actually, they're in a different key because I've rewritten the song in a different key. So I can get rid of those hidden tracks for a start. And then before I start getting rid of anything else, I'd just like to put some structure into the song by having all the drums at the top. So 100 loops, SoCal, and some other loops down here that I tried later on. So put all those at the top. Next, there's a file there with just one bar on, so I'm going to get rid of that. So next I've got some bass. Put the bass there, move the lead vocals all the way down to the bottom. So there's my bass. I've got 3 bass parts. I don't need 3 bass parts, but one of the basses here, I was trying some distortion. So I'm just going to get rid of that because I've still got 2 to play with. I've got my main guitar riff, which is fine where it is, as a folder. Two guitar parts left and right. But down here I've got another rhythm acoustic guitar, which I'm actually going to put right next to that guitar. So I'm going to have the electric guitar and then the acoustic guitar, and I've got a take there that I've muted and I'm not using, so I'm going to get rid of that. So I've got my left right acoustic guitar. I have a lead guitar riff. I have another lead guitar harmony riff with some muted parts in here, so I'm going to get rid of those. And clean guitar part, which I've decided I'm not going to use. And then over here I have some solos, and I've done several takes of solos. It's 5 takes there. So at this stage what I would need to do is I would need to make a decision as to which bits I'm going to use. If I unmute that solo and I decide to go for that bit on take 4 and that bit on take 3 and so on, I would advise you then to flatten that, make a decision, flatten it or flatten and merge, whichever you want to do. And rather than have it as a take folder like that, to actually flatten it and make a decision as to which bits you're going to keep. And once you've done that, then you can get rid of the, I've got different solos where I was trying different tones. And then these final bits here that I've decided, you know, I'm not going to keep them, so get rid of them. And this clean guitar as well, I'm going to get rid of. And my lead vocal at the end. So now I've got on my screen, I've got my drum loops, and I'm not actually going to keep that loop, but I did like that analog drum machine loop. So I have my main loop, I have my analog drum machine, then my bass, main rhythm electric guitar, main rhythm acoustic guitar. These are sort of melodic guitar parts. They're not lead guitar, but they're melodic guitar parts that run through the chorus. Then I've got my solo, and then I've got my lead vocals. At the end of the song here, I have a drum loop that runs way past the end where I need it to be. So I'm going to, I know that this is going to fade out, so I'm going to just bring the end of this track up, right up to the bass part and the guitar part, so that when I bounce I don't get 20 bars of drum loop. And just at the front as well, just to make sure that the track actually starts, bar 1 or bar 2, and then there's no long pauses at the beginning, which there isn't. The arrangement track gives whoever you're sharing the project with a clear visual reference to the structure of the song. So I'm just going to check to see if the arrangement is all correct, which it is. And I'm going to turn off some things that I don't need, so time signature and tempo, using my global tracks just by control clicking in the global tracks. I can turn those functions on and off. So there's my arrangement, and I'm going to leave that open so that if somebody wants to quickly skip to a part, they can do that easily using the arrangement track. Folders are a great way to organize your workspace. As an example here, I have two guitar parts, one slightly left, one slightly right. They're identical, it's just a double track. And what I've done then is I've created a track stack here so that the output of this guitar and the output of this guitar go through bus 20, and the input of this then is bus 20, and on it then I'm able to apply some EQ and some compression to both guitar parts at the same time. But there's two types of stacks, folder stacks. You can either have a summing stack, so if I select two tracks and I go to track stack, I can either have a summing stack which allows me to apply processing to the output of the stack as well as to do other things, or I can have more of a conventional folder stack which is just to organize tracks better. In this mix I've used quite a few third-party plugins. These are plugins that are made by other manufacturers to work in Logic, and if the person you're sharing the project with doesn't have those plugins on their own system, they will get a message like this, which is a missing plugin message, and that will mean that they don't hear the sound as you intend it to. So the best way to get around this is to actually apply the plugin, so to print it if you like, or render it so that the plugin is applied to the audio file, and then you can easily just bypass it or get rid of it like so. And the way to do that is like this. I think the best way to do it is like this. So I'm going to apply this track header on the bass, and that selects the whole bass part. And I'm going to, with that selected, I'm going to go to functions, and I'm going to look for a function called selection based processing. I'm going to select that. And in selection based processing, I've got sort of an A/B. I can actually load up two different versions of, two different presets, and I can sort of toggle between A and B. But in this case, I've made the decision of the sound that I want. I'm not going to change the sound at this point. I've decided on the sound, which is essential. We don't want to start messing with the sound at this point. All we're doing is rendering the plugin. So in A, I'm going to click just below A, and I'm going to apply this EQ plugin that I've got to bass guitar part. As this was my most recent plugin used, I can see it here. So I'm going to click it and open it, and I'm using a stock preset, BD2 preset, so I can go into my factory presets and select BD2. If it was my own preset, so if I'd have changed it slightly, so this plugin is the one actually on the channel strip, and this is the one in the processing window. So if I change it slightly, I can quite easily go to copy, and then over here I can go to paste, and it will paste it. That's one way of doing it. It's probably the quickest way of doing it. The other way to do it is to save the setting and then to open the setting over here. But I think the copy and paste thing is much quicker. So once I've done that, I can then go to apply. I can preview it if I wanted to, like so. There's a function here to create new take, so that would then create another take, but the new take would have the EQ on it. I don't want to do that. I don't want to create a new file. And of course, if I've got delay or reverb, I might want to include the audio effect tail. I don't want to change the gain. All I want to do is apply the plugin. So I go to apply. That will now process that audio to apply that particular plugin. So I can now bypass it or even take it off like so. So that bass now has that plugin on it. There's still some other plugins that I'm using, so I would have to, if I wanted to render more than one plugin, I'd have to go to selection based processing, and I'd have to include the entire chain. Not sure worth a try. I wondered if I could just drag and drop, but I can't. What I would have to do is save the channel strip setting, and then from my channel strip here, I'd have to then load up the setting, and that would then load that channel strip into here. And then when I apply that, then it applies all of those plugins. So that would mean that I could then bypass all of these, and I would just have my bass like that, and this bass would include all of those plugin settings. So that's the best way of doing it. There are other ways. You can obviously bounce from this menu, but if you bounce, then you're creating another audio file which you'll then have to import from your project window. Import, delete the old bass file. So I think that's probably the best way to do it, is to use selection-based processing. Of course, the other option is to simply replace your third-party plugin with a Logic plugin. I've always been quite surprised that when I've done that, and the results that I get, they might not be the same, but most of the time they're no worse. So for example, if I was to take this compressor, which is made by Waves, which is a DBX classic compressor, I could replace that with Logic's compressor, and I could try different input circuits in Logic to get the DBX. One of these is in fact the DBX, or a model of the DBX, and I can just then maybe copy the settings across. So this is around about there somewhere. So the compression ratio is right down here. There's no output gain, and there are no there's no attack or release. So I could just do a sort of a straight A/B comparison, and I've always been quite surprised at how close I can get to the sound of these other plugins. And if I don't get close, I'm always quite surprised at the sound that I get. And like I said, it's not necessarily any worse. And it's a good opportunity at this stage to actually go through that process and just to see if you can replace plugins. Like for example, this delay plugin, I might want to try and replace it with a Logic delay plugin. So in this case, it would be a stereo delay, and see if I can sort of map the settings across. It's quite an interesting exercise because, as you can see, there's two plugins that do the same thing. One has a very nice, smart, sassy looking interface, and the other one's not so much. But under the hood, they're doing the same thing. So if I was to actually turn off the visuals there, and I turn off the visuals there, they look the same now, don't they? So the question is, if we're mixing with our eyes, we might think that actually looks, that is a better looking plugin than that, but under the hood they're doing the same thing. So don't let your eyes fool you into thinking that that's any better than that simply because it looks better. Just want to point that out, because if you're submitting this for an assessment, you're probably going to want to write about the application of plugins. And you, rather than render everything and have everything bounced out so that there's no plugins, you're going to want to make sure that you've got some plugins on here so your assessor can see how you've used them. And then obviously you write about them and discuss why you used them and what sound you were after. So my advice would be not to render everything in place, but to spend a little bit of time trying to replace third-party plugins with some stock plugins just to see how they sound. So we've put our tracks in order and we've applied third-party plugins. And the next thing I would suggest we do is to consolidate the project. What I mean by that is to bring files together into one place. So here I'm using an analog drum machine loop, which I've got from an Apple loop library. So that file sits somewhere else on my hard drive. So if I go to the analog file and I just have a quick look at where that is in the Finder, looks like I've already consolidated it. But had I have not done that, that would be in my loop library, and all these other files would be in my project file. So if I was then to share it with somebody, that loop might not necessarily be in the project. So the way to sort of copy that loop into this project is to use something called Consolidate. If I go to File and I go to Project Management and I go to Consolidate, I can then copy audio files, copy another thing, yes, of course, the ESX instruments and samples. So if I'm using a sampler, I want to make sure that the samples are copied across into the folder. The same for Alchemy, the same for Ultra Beat, and the same for Space Designer. And I can copy across Apple Sound Loop library content, and that will then consolidate those assets into that project. So then they're all in one place. And the other thing next, what I might choose to do is to go back into project management and just to clean that up then, once I've done that. So I might have some unused files, which I do have. I might have some backups that I don't need, and I might have some other folders that I just need to delete. So I can delete those at this stage. If I'm a little bit unsure, I maybe don't want to delete them because they might be being used in another project alternative. My suggestion would be at this point then to go to Project Alternatives and to export your song as a new project. So now this is taking that mix and it's going to copy it into a new Logic project, and it's going to ignore the other alternatives and files that are associated with that alternative. So that's copied that now into a new project. And I go onto my desktop. Here's my new mix. I'm going to open that. I'm going to close and don't save. This is my new mix, and once it opens, I can now safely go to File, Project Management, and Clean Up. And now what it will do is it will clean up files that I'm not using, but I still have those files in my other mix if I've made a mistake and I've deleted something that I need. But now what I'm left with is I'm just left with files here, these files that I see on screen. I'm just going to check that by going to Edit, select Unused. Now there's still some other stuff there. Yeah, I can see that there's still some stuff there that I'd hidden, which is still in the project. I don't need them anymore, so I'm going to go to Delete. And now I'm just left with stuff that's on screen. So all of this over here in my audio file window is, I can see it on screen. So now the project's got much smaller. I've deleted unused files. All of these files are what I can see on here. I've got no hidden files, so the project size should have come right down now. In fact, if I just save and quit, just have a quick check. Yeah, 1.32. I'm just going to open it up again, but 1.32 is you know, about right. Sort of 1-2 gigs is about right. Sometimes you can get it much smaller than that. It's not about trying to get it really small, but obviously if you're sharing and uploading and archiving, you want to try and get it as small as possible. And you know, you certainly don't want to be sharing projects that are 10 gigs or so if you can help it. Otherwise they'll take a long time to download. That's what I'm left with. There's my audio. It's nice and neat. I've deleted all my hidden files, all my hidden tracks. I've made decisions as to what tracks I'm going to keep, what I'm going to get rid of. I've then put them in order. I've then consolidated and cleaned up the project, and I'm at this point now. At this stage, I'm going to want to make sure that I've got fades and crossfades in place. I noticed on this one here there was a clip, so I put a crossfade in, but I'm going to put crossfades, and I'm going to make this sure that there's crossfades and fade-ins, fade-outs, because those clips can make your mix sound a little bit digital, and it might not be sort of obvious in the mix, but it's good to get rid of them at this point. So I'm just going to select those two files there and just go up to my inspector and just type in a 10 or a 20 millisecond crossfade. And also where regions come in at the beginning here, if I've edited them quite tight to the grid, like I have done here, where these guitars start. those fade-ins can just make the intro a little bit smoother, and I usually put a 10 or a 20 second millisecond fade in. Otherwise they're going to come in quite abruptly. So I'm going to go through, make sure that all of that's sort of in place, and use fades. I can either type them in here, or of course you can use the fade tool and draw them in wherever. There it is, the fade tool. It's entirely up to you, but make sure that you've gone through and you've done that. So if you've been asked to submit this work as part of an assessment, you might also have been asked to create production notes. But you might want to create production notes for archiving, or if you're sharing the project with somebody, so that you can quickly create notes and comments on takes and indicate mix settings and save session information within the project itself. If I go up to the browsers window here, I click this icon, I get my notepad. And when I open the notepad, I actually get two notepads. I get a project notepad and a track notepad. Now in the project notepad, as you can see, I've already entered some information, such as artist, song, album. If it's on Spotify, the musicians who played on it. You can include information on the studio that you used and so on, whatever's required. But what the difference between the project and the track is that if I select different tracks over here in my track header, when I have the project notepad open, it stays the same. If I go to track and I move between different tracks, I can then see that the note here is corresponds with the track that I've selected. So it's at this stage and using this track window that you can begin to write some quite detailed production notes. Again, it depends on what you're doing and what's been asked of you, but if you're doing this for an assessment, you might want to comment, for example, on the production process, the way that you recorded that particular sound. So in this case, it's a bass, and it was a DI bass. I also used a mic, but I didn't end up using the mic in the mix. And I've talked a little bit about the tone of the bass. I'm talking here a little bit about the compression and why I'm using the compression. I've talked about EQ as well and why I've EQ'd it, and so on. So I can include as much or as little information as I like at this stage, depending on what's required. If it's an assessment, then you might want to go into much more detail than if it's just a general production note for somebody who you're sharing the project with, or even if it's a note for yourself, so that when you open that project again at a later date, you can see what the thinking behind what you were trying to achieve. And you can either type the notes directly into the notepad, or what I quite often do is I open a Word document. I write the notes into a Word document and then I copy and paste into the notepad. The formatting within this window isn't great. I'm able to choose different fonts and different font sizes and some color as well if I wanted to, but other than that it's not very good. So I tend to write the notes into a Word document, format the Word document, and then copy and paste the formatted text into my notepad. I can also add images to the notepad. All I would need to do is just drag the image that I need to the desktop and then pick it up. I've just move Logic down a little bit, pick up the image and click and hold and drag and drop it, and it will resize it and drop it to where I want it to go. So that's quite useful if you want to demonstrate, as in this picture, foot pedals or bass guitar settings or whatever it is that you want to show, studio setup. And now if I go to the mixer window, now I've got to be careful here, because if you see that blue box around the outside, that's key focus. So if I'm in key focus and I want to go to the mixer window, what I would normally do to open the mixer window is press X. But if I have that window selected and I press X, it puts a little X there because I'm in the wrong window, and that key command is not associated with that window. So what I would need to do is change my key focus. I'm just going to click in the workspace. You can see the blue box is now in the workspace. And now if I press X, I get my mixer window. And if I want to display production notes in the mixer window as well, I go to View, Channel Strip Components. Somewhere down here I will see Notes. There's Notes. And if I turn that on, so it was on, but I'm going to turn it, I've turned it off, I'm going to turn it back on again. I can see my notes, or at least the first few words of my notes appear in the bottom part of the mixer window, which is also quite handy because if then you're sharing a project and perhaps the person who you're sharing with hasn't realized that you've written notes up here in the notepad, they will at least be able to see them down here in the mixer window. So it's at this stage you might want to add your finishing touches. Let's start by looking at the names of each track. They all look okay, but I might want to tidy that up if needed. It's important that the naming is correct and accurate. But there is a nice tool here where I can say select all of these tracks, and I can go to Functions here in the Local menu. And I can either name regions by track name, so take that name over to that file, or go the other way. The next thing I would do is to make sure I've got the correct icons as well, very important. If I just control click on the track header, I can choose different icons. I do this as I go along, to be quite honest, but now's the right time just to check that that's all correct. I quite often, if I've got two different guitarists playing, I'll use two different guitar icons so I can clearly see which is which. So if one is playing a Telecaster and the other one's playing an acoustic, I can use an icon, and it just helps me to see which is which. And the other thing I do is to color the tracks. So if I select the top track here and I go to Option C, I can bring up my color pad, and sorry, I need to select the region. So I select the region, I can then color it. It's entirely up to you how you do it. You might want to select all drums and color them one way, or bass is another way. There's no rules. As you know, I quite like the cascading look, where I start at the top here and sort of cascade through. And if you wanted then to see the colors in the track header, you can control click the track header, and under the track header components you can turn on a color bar, and then you can apply colors here as well. So it just finalizes the track. It says that the track is completed. It makes it easier to navigate for some people. Yeah, and it looks professional. So I would have the names correct, I'd have the correct icon, I'd have colors, and then finally what I would do is, if I had notes, I would leave the notepad open, and if I had a video, I would make sure that the video was displayed up here. I have a format for naming, so I'd name it after the artist, then the song, an abbreviation of the song, then if it's a final mix, so final mix unmastered, of course, no spaces, you can see. Then I'd have the sample rate, then I'd have the bit depth, and then I'd have the revision number. So R1 meaning revision 1. So if then I was sharing it with somebody and they wanted to make a revision, turn the kick drum up, turn the snare down, whatever, I could then send them a revised version, and I would just change that number so I could keep a clear track of where I am with the mix. I also use that naming convention, if you like, for stereo mixes as well. So if I was now to create a stereo mix, which I sometimes do, at this point I'd go to File, Bounce, Project, and check that all this is correct. And then when I name the project, I would use that naming convention. I'd also ask for that file to be included back into the project. So I'd bounce it. It's only going to bounce that little bit there that I looped, but that project now is here audio files, and I could drag it back in. So I could have a stereo mix here as well, which I would mute, and I would have that in on the project as well. So that if for any reason, whatever, that the project opened and there were no plugins or it was corrupt or whatever, at least who I'm sharing it with or when I'm archiving it, I've got a stereo mix included within the project files and within the session. So before I save it, before I archive it, I would have a stereo mix embedded within the project, within the files. You might also want to create stems, which is for another day, another session. So I'm going to open up my notepad and I'm going to include my stereo mix. I'm going to check my notes are all correct, close it. But as I would close it, but I would also go back and I would make sure that it was open again correctly. And quite often what I would do is I would save it onto the USB key, take it to another computer and open it just to check that it opens okay. So here's my final project. I've checked to see if it opens okay on other machines without any issues. You can see the names change from the original name. It's now named after the artist with an underscore. There's no gaps because certain cloud storage doesn't like gaps like OneDrive. So the artist underscore the name of the song or an abbreviation of the name of the song underscore the mix name. So I've called it final mix. So that would mean that it's a final mix without any mastering. And usually I don't use any mastering on the output. I leave it as it is. If it was a mastered version, then that would say mastered, or if it was audio stems, then that would say stems, underscore, the sample rate underscore, the bit depth underscore, and then the revision number. You can see that the file size has come right down now to 410 megabytes. So it's really a compact little file now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zip it. And the way that I do that on a Mac is just to control click the file and go to compress, and that will then compress that down and probably get it even smaller still. If you're sharing the project with somebody, there's three main options I think at the moment. There's WeTransfer, and WeTransfer free account will give you up to 2 gigs and it's only uploaded for a limited time. I think the upload disappears after a while. That's on the free account. Obviously you can get the pro account if you need to, and you'll get a terabyte of storage and you can send and receive up to 20 gigs. For assessment, really, the free account would do. There's also Dropbox. Dropbox is really quite neat, I think. It's quite popular. With Dropbox, you install whereas with WeTransfer, you sort of send files over a web page. With Dropbox, what you can do is you can install the software and you can have your Dropbox here, and you can drag files into your Dropbox, and simply then you would just take the link and share the link with whoever it is by copy and link. With WeTransfer, you send that file, you put in the email address and you share it with that person. They can download it. So here you drag with Dropbox, you drag the file into Dropbox, you wait for it to upload, then you copy the link. And the other free one available is Google Drive, which will give you 15 gigs of storage free. Similar thing where you install the software, you drag your file into your Google Drive when it opens. So there's my Google Drive, there's my Dropbox as well, and I can just sort of simply drag the zip file in wherever it is. There it is. Drag it into there. Do I want to move it? Yes. It might take a while for it to upload, but once it's uploaded, you can then share the file. It's the same with Dropbox as well. You can share the file once it's uploaded, copy the Dropbox link. OneDrive is the account that you get for free as a student, a university student. I think you get something like a terabyte. You can download the OneDrive software. You can see here next to the Dropbox, I've got OneDrive software. And you can, in a similar fashion to the others, you can open up your OneDrive folder and drag the files in and share it in a similar way.